G'day team, welcome to the Feel Good Blueprint and episode 9, part 2 of Isolation Intellect interviews with Australian rock and drumming legend Lucius Borich. If you've not tuned into the first part of this two-part series, I strongly recommend you go back to the first part and listen to it from the start to finish to get the gist of this second part. In this, the second part, Lucius and I discuss his experience going to the United States and recording COG's two latest albums with legendary producer Sylvia Massy, his very interesting current diet and how it keeps him in peak performance, better ideas for a creative mind, and what we need for a better world. Quick disclaimer that we do discuss diet in this episode, and we do not know everyone's individual dietary needs or requirements, so please do not substitute this for actual advice. Please do see your dietitian or medical doctor. I'm keeping this introduction short, but again, I just want to thank Lucius for his generous time. The music you hear is from his band COG. Thank you for allowing me to play it, and I hope you enjoy the second part of the interview. The time you went to the States to record both of your albums, and it's really a formative time for you as well, recording with Sylvia Massy. What was that experience like there in the States recording your albums?
That was fantastic. We didn't go to a conventional studio. It was when we made the decision to go with a producer overseas, and we were trying to find producers, and we sent out what we made was like a prototype of the new normal, which was really great. We made a prototype in Sydney with a good friend of ours called Sean Boucher, and Sean Speedpan Boucher, I should say. And he did our first little EP with Open Up and things like that. And he had a home studio, and he was gracious enough to, support the band and get behind the band, and, really believed in the band. And he was doing some, good recordings with some local artists and things. And he gave us that offer. So we took him up on it. And we ended up, after that little Open Up thing that we did, we worked with him again, and we had all these songs for the new normal. And we did this prototype, and we could have released that, but I think we wanted kind of more. I think, in a sense, that we wanted to broaden the story, if you will, and bring something in that was, something different for us to have an experience with, and seeing if giving this prototype of an album with the 10 songs or so, and give them to producers overseas and see if anyone kind of, popped their hand up and wanted to do it. And Sylvia Massy, who'd done Tool and System of a Down and other bands like that, and she loved it. And she said, "I want to record you guys." So the problem there was we didn't actually have a budget to cater to go over and do it. So that the problem was having to try and find a record company, which we ended up finding, which was a small indie label called Different Music. So they helped fund the process there, and we flew over. We had 6 weeks, so we re-recorded the whole new normal. We knew what we were going to do. We landed in Shasta, which is a beautiful town. The place was called Weed, so it's like 4 hours north of San Francisco, and it's inland a little bit. There's a real majestic mountain there. It's kind of what we've used as a bit of artwork, actually, for the last couple of releases, singles that we've done, because it was such a special place. We had such a great time there, and it's got such a great vibe. Sylvia's studio was an Art Deco theatre, so it wasn't a conventional studio. She'd turned that into a studio, and it was awesome. So we were kind of in and out, but the experience was really great. And obviously we came back to Australia with a fully fledged album that was produced overseas and mixed overseas, so it had a little bit more of a story attached to it. And I think that helps sell it a little bit more to the radio stations and so to speak. So that was obviously, we went on and toured that, and it was great. And then that opened the door for us to go and do some of the bigger festivals, and there was a bit more hoopla and things like that. And then we took the opportunity to record again over there with Sharing Space, but this time we didn't go with we went with 10 songs that were very skeletal. They were just ideas. But Sylvia wanted us to write a whole lot more. So we actually were there the second time for around 8 to 9 months. And we were solidly writing and recording at the same time. So that was a really great experience. And we had a great time doing that. came back to Australia, did a few tours, I think, then went back over there. But yeah, it was an incredible time for the band, and you know, we were really had the ability to hone our craft a bit more and feel like we were fully fledged, you know, recording musicians and live musicians, and that was what we were doing. And yeah, it was a fantastic time, and we got some good results as well with the second album. So all in all, those experiences were you know, we hold them very dear, that's for sure.
Yeah, and the results, you know, the art, the records themselves are fantastic. Of course, some of my favorites that you guys have obviously put out. Just Visiting has been on. I've been playing that a bit more recently too, because I know you redid that one yourself, didn't you? You re-engineered that one, was it?
Well, we remastered it.
Remastered it, sorry. Yeah, remastered.
Yeah, just kind of remastered it for, because when we did that, it was just Flynn and I when we did that. And you know, going back a little bit, you know, after I finished up with Juice, and then I went on to playing with a Hanging Tree for a while, and that kind of ran its course. And then I was kind of wondering what to do. I went overseas to America, and I was about, I think I was 27, 28, I think. So I packed up everything, sold everything, went to the States to live in America. And I was just kind of been touring in Australia for 10 years or so. And I really wanted to get out into the world and see what else I could experience. And I kind of germed the idea from COG when I was in America. And, you know, just quickly, a lot of the songs and ideas came for Just Visiting from that experience of living there at that time. And when I came back to Australia and hooked up with Flynn again out of the Hanging Tree, you know, he had some ideas and songs. So we kind of, you know, molded those together, and that all, you know, came into the Just Visiting album, which was, we recorded ourselves, really minimal. You know, we had like a Tascam 48, what was it? Tascam 488, I think, 8-track.
Wow.
You use cassette tapes, just normal cassette tapes. So
classic old school.
Classic, yeah. Well, yeah, it was kind of like, you know, you could now, because I'd always played around with little 4-tracks and 2-tracks, and, you know, always had these little home kind of real bedroom little studio things, you know, Digi 002s and stuff like that. So my engineering and getting into all that little production side of it it's just part of, obviously, just being a musician, record your ideas and everything. But this was a little more serious when we got this desk. You know, the pre's were not a bit nicer, and it had a bit more, I think we went halves in it, and we spent quite a bit of money on that, I remember, Flynn and I. And then it was basically, we went to demo, and the whole Just Visiting album is actually demos, what we considered to be demos. So it had a real spark of the magic of, you know, the first time of recording them, which was great. And the drums were recorded with 4 mics, real minimal. I played the bass on it because Luke wasn't there at that time. He was just starting to learn how to play and be a musician, and he was in another band. So Flynn and I just, you know, recorded everything. We took it to another little production studio, and did the vocals on top, and then we mixed it. Didn't like the mix, we remixed it. So we had this kind of demo, which we tried to shop around, obviously before the new normal. We tried to shop around to different labels, and no one was interested. No one wanted to know. So being impatient, you know, we just made the decision just to put it out as it is. And the booking agent we had at the time, who we ended up, you know, who really helped develop us and helped us along the way, Owen Orford, really fantastic, lovely bloke. He said, why don't you put it into, you know, 2 parts, have 2 EPs, you'll get you'll get more longevity and a bit more value out of it. And you can kind of work it a little bit more like that. So we did that. We took that advice, and that was fantastic. And that really worked. And with a bit of his, you know, his push and his kind of like relationships with the industry and his knowledge and everything, he helped really position us into a good position as well earlier on, which was great. So yeah, that was, which is funnily enough now is really interesting, because, well, there's 2 things. One was, given the way it was recorded and everything, so simple and all the rest of it, in between transitions of doing shows and trying to have an income and all the rest of it, you know, I ended up working in cafes. So I ended up becoming a barista.
Okay.
As you do when there's no gigs and it's kind of things are drying up a little bit. So I had to, find other ways. And at that point in time, I wasn't doing production or working in studios or wanting to be an engineer or anything like that. So I kind of fell into that a bit. And I remember being out the back, washing the dishes and stuff. And Triple J was on. That's what the cafe was playing at the time. And one of the COG songs came on Triple J from Just Visiting.
Wow. What was the reaction like?
It was a really quite interesting moment, because there was one of our songs that was in between two songs that obviously had big production and money put into them, and there was our little Just Visiting song that was produced in a way that was quite minimal, but it was on Triple J, and it kind of said a couple of things to me, which was like, it's not really about the production, although that's a really obviously important part, as we know, but it's really about the song. And if it's a good song, and people get the vibe from the song, regardless of how it's recorded, it can go places, it can do things. Yep. So that kind of gave me a bit of the confidence, and the band the confidence, to keep pursuing our own, a path, if you will, which was really good. So, and then funnily enough now, that album that was done on TDK cassette tapes and a few little DAT tapes, and, as of 3 or 4 years ago, finally moved on to getting transported onto vinyl. And we put it on, we made a limited run of vinyl for Just Visiting, and to have it on vinyl and remastered was just so good. It was just such a, it was like it was, in some respects, it was like finding the Holy Grail.
Yeah, because you're on vinyl now, aren't you? That's great.
Yeah, or just seeing, because it's a whole new world now, like digitally, and recording is so different. And the last real performance recording I did on analog tape and a desk was the Hanging Tree album, which was, you had 5 people on the beautiful Neve desk, everyone doing a pass and a take of the song, automating the mix as it gets run onto the DAT machine from the 2-inch tape and all that. So it was a real performance, even just the mix, whereas now it's quite different. That whole environment's quite different. Yeah. So, I really miss some of that kind of stuff. But just to see the album, Just Visiting especially, make it to vinyl was a really great moment, I think, for the band. It was really, really great. And we are planning as we speak now, we're trying to get it into the works to have the new normal and sharing space on vinyl too. So we're having a look at that real seriously.
Very exciting. That's great.
Yeah.
You're on everything now. All we got to do is do the cassette tapes, but no, maybe not cassette tapes.
It'd be interesting if we could bring those back, wouldn't it? Yeah. I've got some Juice cassette tapes back, old, because when Juice, obviously, when we did our first album, that was all done on tape and everything, and so we had cassette tapes, and they were putting out cassette tapes before there was CDs, right?
Yeah.
So the progression of like where music's gone in the last 20 years is just, wow, it's amazing seeing where it's done.
Yeah, I don't know if I can see cassettes coming back anytime soon, but they're wonderful things. Yeah,
you never know.
They're troublesome things as well, but they're wonderful things. Great.
Yeah, I remember putting the pen in, the biro or the lead pencil to try and wind the tape because it had all come out.
Do I ever? Oh, so many trash tapes. Sometimes it'd be too far.
You sit there twirling it like this, and it's like a toy or something. It's like trying to wind it as quickly as you can.
Yeah. Or the ones that got too munched. The ones that got too munched by the machine, and they were gone. Yeah. That was terrible.
Right.
Great.
Classic.
And then finally, like, just looking into the future, I know there's some unclear things around what's happening right now, but for you and your vision for your drumming and music, Lucius, what are you looking to next?
Well, I think that expanding myself as a producer and as an engineer and mixing and recording. I mean, as you can see behind me, I've got the kit, but I've also got I've got the mics and everything. So to be able to have that relationship has, with drumming, has brought in a completely new element, which is so great. Because you can play drums, you can practice drums, you can play live drums. Playing drums in the studio is a different thing altogether in so many respects. And then being an engineer and mixing drums, when you start to integrate both of them, it helps your drumming. You actually become a better drummer by understanding how, you know, engineering and mixing and, you know, making drums sound good. When you go to perform them in a studio environment, you know, you're looking for things differently, or you're hearing things slightly differently, because then you get behind the mixing desk and the engineering desk and that side of things, and you want things to be a certain way because it's easier for you to do your job. So it's actually helped me become a better drummer, and it's been a big part of my growing. Definitely, you know, having that, you know, learning how to mic the drums, put them in phase, you know, how to hit them, tune, you know, making the drums sound good. Obviously, every hit that I do when I'm playing, the consistency or where I want to, you know, because when you go to mix it, it can be quite challenging if there's certain elements of the performance that's not there. So that can be quite challenging, but it's helped me kind of hone my craft there, I guess, to become even a better drummer on that front, you know, in the production studio recording side of things. So I try to get a lot of practice in doing that, and, you know, just the ongoing creating of trying to make, you know, musicians and instruments sound good, and mixing is another fantastic, you know, I call it painting with sound. You know, you really are trying to, because you're dealing with vibration frequencies, and you know, it's a whole, you know, different ball game in so many respects under the umbrella of music. It's such a great thing, and I just want to keep on getting better at my craft, you know, like, because there's no real rules in some, as long as it sounds good. You know, if you've got a great song and there is a good song, and you can help it by developing it with some good production and enhance that, it's a great position to be in. It's a great function. It's a really great you know, part of my life that I really enjoy doing that. And you know, you become quite, you know, obviously tech nerdy, and you know, you're learning a lot. And I didn't go to any engineering school, or I didn't, you know, study in any schools or anything like that. But there's, you know, through my years of recording, you pick up a lot of knowledge, and then now you have the opportunity to, you know, there's a lot of tutorials online. You know, you've got to really research and do a lot of practicing, make a lot of mistakes, and, you know, do a lot of engineering and mixing as much as you can to try and get a good result. Because, you know, I feel like I know how I want it to sound. When I hear other, you know, production mixers, engineers and things that I really admire, and I like their production style and what they can do. You want to try and, you know, be able to put something on that you've done, and it kind of it meets the same, it's in the ballpark, you know. So
yeah,
there's certain, you know, it's fascinating for me, that whole side of recording and engineering. It's just another side of it that's just, you know, really captivating for me, and I just really want to keep growing with that. And I love working with bands and producing bands, and you become like another member of the band for a short period of time, you know, trying to help them out and craft their sound and get what they feel they want and they need. So that's, you know, such a fun, you know, it's for me, really, it's all about enjoying what you do. Obviously, it can be kind of cliche, but it really is true, you know, and I really enjoy doing what I do. And whether it's live, whether it's teaching, whether it's producing, production, or sessions, or, you know, you know, I think I've just tried to keep on diversifying and broadening those kind of aspects within the music game, if you will, or the creative musical realm.
Yeah, I could imagine that the majority of people don't really make the distinction between being a musician and a producer and engineer are completely different skill sets. And I guess the culmination of everything you've done, when you do have bands come in, you can really give them a lot of different aspects and ideas about which directions they can go. And I think that must be really a fulfilling thing, having all those sort of tools in your toolkit.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely, you know, when you see them happy about what's come about, and you know, obviously gives you confidence to keep moving forward and work on, you know, and they're obviously passing around the results they've had, and they're saying they had a good experience and all that type of stuff. It's just slowly but surely it gets out that, you know, you don't just play drums or whatever, but now, you know, you're seriously taking this on, and you can do this, and you can do it quite well. You know, you can, and I think at this point in time, if you're ever growing in terms of that environment, because as I said, you know, there's no real rules, but there's so many variables how to make music sound good, you know, and you can do it in so many ways. So, yeah, it's a lot of fun,
Yeah, and I could imagine. I'm kind of going to segue. Imagine being a drummer. You probably got your cardio sorted, so that sort of aspect of things is sorted. But I know you've got a really interesting approach to your diet, which we discussed before. But what's your focus at the moment with your diet?
Yeah, well, I mean, you just talk cardio, so I think I've tried to relatively be, you know, obviously drumming is a very physical instrument more than any other instrument, so to speak. So, you know, you do have to be fit, and, you know, I've gone through stages where I haven't. Well, I've given that I've been playing for a long time, I'm pretty lucky that I haven't got many ailments, I guess, given that I've been physically playing the drums for so long. So, you know, I've kept up. I've always been a surfer, so I love surfing. So that's always been a big part of my cardio, if you will, and fitness aspect, because that's very physical and in that way. And then, you know, I've been doing, you know, yoga off and on. My wife's a yoga teacher as well, and I've been doing that aspect. So, you know, the cardio with the breathing and that aspect, and the stretching and the strengthening, using your own body weight and things like that. That's also helped. So there's, you know, I'll do some light jogging or walking or whatever, skateboarding as well. I still like doing some of that sometimes. I go with my boys and we go down to the bowl and still have a bit of fun there. I've got to be careful though, because it's a hard surface, obviously.
Yeah.
But, you know, always trying to keep, in some respects, you know, active to keep that fitness up, that level for drumming, because it is demanding. And you do have to have good cardio. And if you're playing a show, an hour show or recording, you know, yeah, you've got to have that. You've got to have that strength. So, you know, the diet's going to play into that. And the diet I have now is more based on that I had problems in the past. So I had to kind of work out a diet for myself, and something that was going to work, because all of a sudden I started having reactions when I was playing live, and this was kind of around the end of touring the Just Visiting periods with COG, that I started breaking out in all these rashes and hives, and something was going on with my body. I started having an autoimmune kind of response to whatever was going on, and that was really frustrating and challenging. And it was, you know, I was like very unconfident to get on stage, because if you have a allergic reaction to something, you know, people will tell you who get allergic reactions, it can be life-threatening, and they get worse and worse. So, and I was up against this type of situation. So, and I knew it was coming from the diet. I knew it was coming from what I was eating and what I was kind of exposed to. Now, before that, I'd kind of gone down this path of like this vegetarian path, and I was experimenting with that, and I'd read some, you know, interesting books, and you know, there was, you know, some philosophy behind it, and some aspects of, you know, compassion behind it, and some environmental aspects behind it, and all sorts of things. And I thought they were kind of quite interesting, and I was, you know, also experimenting with being a vegan and stuff. So I was eating a lot of plants and a lot of grains and a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of sugars. And I started to bypass a lot of the meat-based products, which I'd kind of grown up on. But still, you know, the majority of my diet, I would have said previously, would have been carbohydrates and sugars as a child. And one of the reasons why I say that is because, you know, the teeth in our heads that we have you can dig up skulls from a long time ago and you can see the teeth are still intact. And some are, it's interesting to me that being so young at my age, that my teeth, which is a good indication because they are such a solid structure, have broken down. And I equate that to obviously the sugars, the carbohydrates, and, being young and, having those type of more of that base of a diet. And if it's going to break down your teeth, well, then what is it doing to your body? Being that you can, these teeth are supposed to be such a, a hard substance, and you can dig up skulls from a long time ago and there are the teeth, they're still intact, right? So, it was interesting to me that, being young, obviously not knowing much about diet at all, as we all know, it's such an interesting, when you're younger, you just try to fuel yourselves on sweet things, sugar things. That's the main thing you go to. So you've got your carbohydrates and you've got all your sweets and your sugars and all the rest of it. So obviously, I was eating some, eggs and fish and chicken and meats when I was young, but that wasn't the prime, that wasn't the overall diet at all. It was a capacity of some of it, but it wasn't, the more of it was sugars and carbohydrates. And then I went into and your grains and things like that. So when I went into more of a vegetarian diet, well, then that amplified that even more so, because your carbohydrates do turn to sugar. And then your grains, you've got your grains, which are very fibrous, and then you've got, obviously your plant foods as well. So I think my body got to a point where it was just, it had enough, and I was starting to get symptoms and I was suffering in many different ways. So whether it be the migraines I was suffering from really badly, and a lot of migraines, and I'm talking like quite a few a month, and headaches as well. The hives, the urticaria, which is what it's called. I went to obviously had to go and get seen and see what was going on. And, they found out there was a leaky gut symptom that was going on. And, I had salicylate. I was very sensitive to salicylates, and I was like, well, what's that? And well, that's in plants and vegetables. It's kind of like a natural defense mechanism against, predators that might eat it. So it's actually a plant and vegetables form of toxin that it releases, which can actually be quite detrimental to the human being if you have too much of it. And it can make you feel quite strange as well, if you overload yourself. Plants, they haven't got legs to run, so they have to have a defensive mechanism to things, and they want to survive and they want to live and they want to try and thrive. So they have their way of trying to survive and live, and then they give off these toxic. That's why most plants are toxic. You wouldn't eat most of them, but there are some we can deal with, but still they still have the salicylate capacity, and fruits and vegetables, and they turn to sugars, and you've got your fruits that are the sugars.
Yeah, so I've seen in some documentaries, Lucius, that there's one camp that says when you cook vegetables, it releases the nutrients. But there's another camp that says there's a chemical, which I think is the one you're describing. Once you cook them, it releases toxins as well. So maybe both of those things can be released in cooking.
Yeah, well, cooking's another interesting thing to talk about as well, and what that can do to the food. And probably why we've done that. But I think, when I had the rashes and all this type of stuff, I had to really break things down. And I've been vegetarian, kind of quasi-vegan, if you will, for that 4 or 5 year period. A lot of grains, because I had to fill the gap. Plants just don't fill the gap, you know what I mean? And you need as much bread as you can load up on the bread and the carbs and the grains and everything like that. But to me, I think what was happening, there was way too much fibers and sugars, which were starting to break down the lining and the wall of the gut in so many respects. So, I think that's what was kind of was happening. And then I, not knowing what I know now, but back then I broke it right down to just real simple basic eating. So basically, I broke the foods down really simply. I had a kind of diary. I was writing things in every time I would eat something. I would see the reaction. and what would happen, and how I'd feel. And something was going on with the wheat. Definitely something was going on with the wheat. So I don't know whatever it is that they're spraying on the wheat, or how, wheat's cultivated now, or what's, what's happening is that my body can't handle it. It just can't seem to handle grains and wheat, and and also, the migraines were intense as well. So I kind of broke it down to that, which was good. So I found a little bit of that puzzle. So I had to stay away from that. And but then I was kind of like, well, what am I going to eat now? So obviously I went a little bit more to eating a bit more meats and things like that, introducing those back into the diet, which was obviously helping fuel things, and helping feeling full, and like I'd eaten a meal and things like that. But I was still trying to stay more kind of plant-based, if you will, in many regards. And it's, things still weren't working for me. So, I kept experimenting with different things, and I started, obviously, the internet with opening up with, lots of more information, and now you can do a lot more research. And, I've just been, for the last, 10 years, like, really invested in understanding nutrition, and what's the best source of nutrition, and it's definitely not a one size fits all, because we've got, different people from different races that have come from different backgrounds, that, work with different foods and have different blood types, and, and all the rest of it. So, being that there's more of this, more than ever now, obviously there's more of this integration of foods from many different places, and there's a lot of reason to know that not everyone's going to suit all these different types of foods, because of their backgrounds or where they've come from. So
yep.
Some people, they just can't handle it, because their parents, and all, it's just whether it's in the DNA gene pool or whatever, how the body's passed on through generations, and what it can and can't deal with. I think there's certain aspects. I think there's certain aspects there you'd have to take into account. So I went into a bit of researching of, obviously, my family. What were their foods? What were they eating? And so that was part of that as well. And then I started working in nutrition as well, which was great. And understanding, actually working in kind of like, like alternative health cafes, if you will, that were kind of, really starting this trend of really honing in what a good diet is, and hopefully, more kind of, real whole foods that are in your environment, not ones that come from, other countries or other places, but just, local foods and that type of stuff. So
kangaroo.
Yeah. Well, the shop I was working with, there was possum, and there was kangaroo, and there was emu eggs, and we would
Have
eat
you had possum before?
Yeah, we'd eat possum, we'd eat emu eggs, like they're big, it's like, crack one of those, it's like 20 eggs, it's like. So there was the guy I was working for was pretty big on, the native and the environment of Australian, foods and what you would eat. So it was interesting, being in that place and learning about that from that nutritional standpoint. And that was a real eye opener, especially with in lots of different areas, and dealing with funguses in the body, parasites in the body, bacterias in the body, and getting to understand that and how important that is, and the relationship between gut bacteria and these type of things, and which is so important. It's probably one of the biggest, now where I'm at, probably the main thing I think about when I eat is bacteria. When I have any type of food, I want to make sure I'm having it with some type of bacteria, or there's a good bacteria that's going to be good for my gut, because as we know, the gut's connected to the nervous system. So if the nervous system's connected to the gut and the gut's getting what it needs, and the microbiome in the gut is working, well there, well, then you're probably going to have a better nervous system, and you're probably optimally going to be feeling and thinking good in a well-being way. So, that's kind of like what I concentrate on now. So I kept studying and all the rest of it, and then we started to hear more about these paleo diets and these type of higher fat meat-based carnivore diets that have started to kind of come on the scene in the last 4 years or so. And it's not to say it's just come on the scene; it's always been there. I mean, that's the thing that
now it's
really
popular culture. Yeah,
that's one of the realizations I had too, that the main staple element of our prime sourced diet was meat. That was that was basically the trophy foods, if you will, out of anything else. It was, everything else was what we'd get if you couldn't get the meat. All indigenous cultures will tell you that, or what the white cultures will tell you that. I mean, it was the prime source of our food, and how we became who we are and where we are today is through those nutritional relationships with animals, which was so beneficial to our brain, developing our brain, our obviously our physical capacity in many different ways. So I started to understand that the decision I'd made 15, 20 years ago, venturing off down in this vegetarian vegan path, was completely wrong, and it had a detrimental effect on me, I think, because I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, which is my diet now is basically a carnivore diet. So it's a heavily meat-based diet, 80% for sure, local grass-fed animals from where we live around here. Our own eggs from our chickens here. And I kind of like, because I was still off and on getting these attacks every now and then, I thought I'd just give this diet a go, and I'd done quite a lot of heavy research into it as well, and a lot of things were making sense to me. So for 2 years, I really went quite intense in eating just meats, and it was interesting how I felt, and it was interesting what happened. The migraines went away, which was amazing, given that the word, grain is in migraine. I gave up the grains and went more for the higher fat diets, and that seemed to be just fueling me so much better, and without the carbs and the sugars, which are going to give you more insulin spikes because it's sugar. So you're going to be having more of a kind of ride, if you will, with your blood sugars and what can happen there. But if you have more of a animal based higher fat diet, those soluble fats that you eat from animals and proteins, it's a slower release. So you can become, and you feel, for me anyway, personally, I definitely felt a lot calmer in so many respects, and a lot more satisfied with what I was eating, and a lot less grazing or wanting to have more foods after having a very solid nutritionally packed dense meat meal, and I really broke it down to just to see where I was at and see how my body would react if I introduced, which I did the other week, was a pizza. And every now and again I'll do this. I'll have some grains, or I'll have some of that type of stuff, just to see how my body's going to react. And it reacts. I come out in an attack. So I obviously can't eat those things, but if I'm eating just these meat-based products, I don't seem to have any symptoms. I don't get any attacks. Yeah. I don't, and I did experiments too, I think you need to do experimental things to really get, and many people say things online, they give you ideas and, the statistics and stats and all sorts of things, but unless you you really do an all-round experience of it all, then you can come to the conclusion of what's working for you. And as I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all, so people just pushing a plant-based, vegan-based diet, and that's all you should have, is not going to work for some people, and it's definitely going to be detrimental to them. And obviously, to me, I couldn't live that way, because I have reactions to that. If I have too much fruit, sugars, and carbohydrates, the fungus, becomes too apparent in the body. If I have too many grains, I get headaches. If I have, the wheat, I get hives. So eating and going quite extreme with the meat-based diet was really interesting, and I really cut everything out. So, because I wanted to see what just that felt like, and it was very, very positive. I had great results, and I even was eating, raw meats, and I thought, well, you eat raw fish. There's, steak tartare and different other, raw meat dishes you can get in restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
I started doing, because when we talk about cooking too, there's an interesting thing about what happens to the food when you cook it. Now with meat, you can pretty much eat it raw, and it's fine. It's in its capacity of whether it's fish or, I've done raw chicken, I've done, raw meats, obviously, raw fish, raw
you've
eggs,
done raw chicken.
raw meat, raw chicken as well.
How do you do raw chicken?
Well, you just eat it like you would eat raw meat, or you'd eat raw fish.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Well, they serve that in some places in China. They'll just sear the chicken on the top, and they'll serve it to you pretty much raw. They don't cook it all the way through.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a little bit of a thing going on there with because a lot of these things, when they're raw, they have the elements of bacterias, and they can be good bacterias, and also the structure and the compounds of the food are intact in terms of its nutrient density. So if you go to cook anything, fruit or a vegetable or animal, it can destroy the natural elements of what it is, because you're obviously heating it up to a capacity. So with meats, you can heat them. It depends how you cook them, and then you start to learn, well, frying an egg is different to scrambling to poaching an egg, to eating an egg raw. It can do different things to the compounds of the element that you're eating, the food that you're eating. So, and obviously, one of the things is we think that cooking food is going to kill off any of the bacteria, so it's not going to harm us. It's not going to, it's not going to make us sick. And there's can be some truth to that, but if you can see every animal in nature, all they do is eat raw food. All they do is eat raw meat. That's all they do. Not only
they don't cook anything, do they? No,
they don't cook anything.
True.
Not only that, they eat rotten meat. They'll eat meat that's been sitting there, and they're fine. We have to start asking some serious questions here in some respects, because there's something going on with bacteria and the gut and the way we're eating foods, and how it's compounding on our health, our mental health, and everything else. Because bacteria is alive. You've got to remember that. It's alive. Viruses aren't alive. They're not alive until they're in your body, and then you activate, or it gets activated through a lack of an immune system that gets compromised. And a virus is not a live thing, from what I understand, what I've researched, and what I know from people I've spoken to, and also things I've seen doctors and experts talk about these things. Bacteria is alive. Fungus is alive. Parasites are alive. They're a different thing. And we are walking viruses, bacterial, fungal, parasite. We've got this relationship with a whole other world that's inside of us. And it's been part of our evolution. It's been part of our relationship with nature, is having it and keep it, it's got to be kept in check. But there's something interesting that I came across while, eating, the raw meats, and I was eating all different types of organ meats too, and experimenting with those. And, it was obviously it's going to be different because it's not salted and it's not sugared, and we're so used to salty and sugared food that's the palate. So anything else tastes and feels and is weird and boring, and you know, raw meats, really, they are quite boring. You know what I mean? It's you know, it's like a raw broccoli or a raw, you know, you've got to put something on it, some salt or some lemon or something just to digest it or whatever. You know, we've been so corrupted with sugar and salt and things like that, you know.
Yeah, yeah, it's frustrating. I just to jump in, I've tried few different things myself, and I don't know if you heard of the guy called Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson's a guy that's done the carnivore diet, and he's had dramatic improvements from it in his life and his health, by the sounds of it. You know, I'm talking about,
and his daughter as well.
Yeah, and
incredible thing.
Yeah, I've tried different things through my life, and I'm by no means an expert, but I found that when I cut things back to basics and actually started eating things in their truest form without what you said, any additives or anything on top, actually you do get to a point where it tastes really good, actually, with barely anything on it, because you retrain your brain to know that's natural and that's how it is, and it tastes good again.
Yeah, it takes some time, and that can happen. That's right. You know, and I think just growing up as a young adult and having the sweet stuff and the sugars and the promotion of the corporate, you know, overlay of foods advertised that are full of, you know, processed and, you know, sugars and sweets and you name it, has just really put us off to a bad start, you know, and especially our generation anyway. I mean, the elder generations, such as my grandparents, you know, they were all growing their own food, you know. They didn't have refrigeration. Everything was either cured or salted or fermented or eaten raw, or, you know, the refrigerators are a new thing. They've only been around like 80 years or something. You know, it's a new phenomenon compared to like the history of mankind eating. So yeah, if I logically try to take it back, well, you know, how were we eating? Well, a lot of things were raw. A lot of things had the bacteria. A lot of, you know, I got some raw cheese the other day that's got the bacteria from the caves in France. You know, that's the lady at the local, you know, dairy thing said to me, oh, well, you know, the bacteria on here is from the caves in France. You know, I've got some meat fermenting in the fridge at the moment, which is going to be, it's called high meat, which will be raw meat, which is over a long period of time kind of ferments, breaks down and has the bacteria. Or we've got the sauerkraut, which comes from a cabbage. And then you cut that up, and then you put that, you know, you put that under the pantry for 3 or 4 months, and it comes out and it's got bacteria. It hasn't been cooked. It's raw. It's got the bacteria. It smells funky. It smells weird, but it's got this. So there's something going on there that we really need to pay attention to. And I think that once we understand that, we'll see our health really start to evolve and come back to, you know, a more of a natural state and a better state. And you know, when I started to learn that, you know, fruits and vegetables are pretty much man-made. You know, they're grafted from, you know, some wild vegetables and things, but the majority of fruits and vegetables you get in the shop, you don't find them in nature. They're not in nature anywhere. Yeah. You know, you can walk for miles and you're not going to see that. That stuff has been cultivated and harvested and kept man-made, but it's not. You know, you might find some wild berries or some wild, you know, root vegetables or some whatever, but what you will find in nature is the abundance of meat, is the abundance of animals, is the abundance of that type of stuff. So, you know, that logically also, you know, said a lot to me. If I was in nature, no corner shops, you know, none of these type of things. Well, what would you eat? You're gonna wait 3 months for celery to grow, or you know, cabbage to grow, or you know, are you going to have a blender and a knife and a cooking stuff to try kind of like make it your body actually be able to digest these very things? You know, with your vegetables and all these things and your grains, you've got to soak them for 3 days. You've got to cook them just, you know, to make them edible for the body to actually digest them. You know, a lot of these vegetables, you know, you can't eat them raw. You can't eat, you know. You can get all sorts of weird, and I know I have anyway, especially when it comes to, you know, some of the raw vegetables and stuff like that. You know, my gut will just go into complete overload of flatulence. So I can't digest it. You know, the way I can digest it, vegetables, is if I ferment them or I have the bacteria help break them down. So, you know, my diet now, well, just quickly with when I was experimenting doing the full meat and a lot of the raw meats, still having some cooked meats, just, you know, slow kind of cooking them, or light searing them, that type of thing. But I did an experiment too where I introduced grains, a buckwheat grain, which is not a wheat, but it's a grain. It's a heavy grain, but you have to soak it. You have to really soak it, and you have to really cook it to make it edible. And I did an experiment where I ate for, you know, 5 days just nothing but meat. And then I had a bowl of, on the 5th day, I had a bowl of buckwheat porridge, which I made. And the following day, and what the result was, and what I saw, it's not very nice to say, but you know, the aftermath in the toilet bowl was I saw remnants of the buckwheat. Yeah. Now I'd been eating meat for 5 days, and you've got a bowel, you know, that's got quite, you know, it's if it was stacked up with 5 days of eating meat, on that 5th day, that buckwheat shouldn't have been in the bowl the following day. What had happened and what it proved to me is that the body digested the meat so well, it completely evaporated it, and the grain couldn't be digested. So it just passed through the canal of the digestive system. So that said a lot to me, because there's a lot of, you know, lies going around that if you eat all this meat, you're going to be stacked up and it sits in your guts for 20 years and you know, it's going to, all this stuff. That's not true at all. And that experiment to me proved that. And I think, especially if you eat your meats more raw or you know, very cooked in a way that's, you know, easier for the body to digest, the body just evaporates it. It takes it so well. And I think if you're going to the toilet 2 or 3 times a day, what that's saying to you is that you're not digesting your food at all. The body's not needing it. It's just passing it out because it doesn't want it.
Okay. That's interesting because I know that like a lot of commercial farming can be the issue as well. So what you're doing, you're supporting the local, eating local. And I think here in London, the quality of food I found, especially being in the city, is not great. Finding that locally sourced stuff is really difficult. And actually, I think it's a really big difference between the quality of the food as well and how it's digested. Yeah. Do you think what happened to you and how you found that? You mentioned before people come from different areas. Do you think that's unique to you, or do you think all people can live with this sort of diet and have those sort of effects?
Oh, well, I definitely would feel that the meat first is probably the most optimal nutritional diet that everybody can exist on and won't have many conditions from it. That would be my understanding, and obviously just going through what I've gone through the transitions of my diet from my sickness to where I am now and how I'm feeling and how I'm eating, which my diet now is pretty much 80% still animal based, still some raw here and there, obviously, but everything's cooked really quite low. The vegetables I have minimal, they're fermented. Hardly any fruit at all, and bugger all carbs. I might just eat some sweet potato or whatever, but more of the animal-based products. I think if you just logically look at our ancestors, you know, and what they ate, the body is such a design that it can live on many different things. It can eat many different things, but I think there's things that are going to agree with it and other things that aren't going to agree with it. And I would say that majority of the time, meat-based stuff would be the optimal for our body to agree on, you know, and to live on. Now, you're going to have other people, you know, not say that. But if you look just back through history, that's basically being the prime sourced food. And everything else, you know, I think it can be pretty tricky, you know, it can be very, very, very tricky. I see it in my friends and my family. They can't eat this vegetable or that fruit or this or that because it kind of wreaks havoc on them, you know. But I haven't really had too many friends say, oh, well, meat makes me feel this way. Now, but I would say if you overcook meat and you charcoal your meat and you cook your meat, you're destroying it, and you're making something that becomes more carcinogenic. So it's not going to be good for you. So there's an optimal temperature to also cook the food, you know. there's an optimal way of, doing that. You know what I mean? I think can be important for your digestive system as well. But I definitely find that the raw meats are definitely the most easiest to digest.
Yeah,
definitely.
Well, I'm really pleased.
May taste a little boring, and it may be a bit like this, but and it's not to say that I eat that way all the time at all. But because I did that just as an experiment. But it's I think you've got to look at where your ancestors came from, what they ate, what they were eating. And I think that will help play into a big part of you having a healthy diet. And I also think you've got to introduce, and I would suggest that, researching and understanding, bacteria and the foods of bacteria and how important that is, and why that is so important to have in your diet.
Yeah, no, I'm really pleased it's worked for you, and you found your way that works for you, and people should definitely do their own research. Good.
Yeah.
And then just on the creative mind the creative mind piece, you've obviously created some amazing music. You've been able to make these pieces of art yourself. Is there any practice that you have for building a creative mindset?
It would be just picking up those sticks or that guitar and just start writing. Start getting into exploring. I think once you get it going, once you get the ball rolling, you get a bit more of a roll on it, and it can things can start obviously coming quite fast. If you have a certain discipline, an aspect of discipline to it, that can help focus the mind, sharpen the mind, and get you in a really nice place of just keeping on playing and cultivating ideas and using the imagination and things like that. So yeah, you got to kind of work at it, but I think you've got to just keep yourself oiled, if you will, if that's the right word. So you just got to keep doing it. And obviously, if you can get outside influences from whatever you're experiencing, to kind of also help bring that into being able to cultivate writing songs and experiences that you have, or things like that, looking at areas of life that can bring in aspects of being able to put that into song because you're inspired by something.
Yep.
That's also obviously good as well. I mean, I know we've done that with COG a lot. That was a big aspect of our band, was to try and look at the outer environment, the political environment, the way the world is currently working, or is going, or where it's going, or how it's working, and bringing those into song, putting them down. But yeah, I think the discipline aspect of it's pretty important.
Yeah, great advice. And then just to wrap up, where can people find more about you and your studio, Lucius?
Well, I've got the typical socials, like your Instagram and your Facebooks and things like that. I've got a website for the studio, which is online. Studios 101 Byron Bay. So yeah, just those kind of places, those typical places, really.
I'll put your website in the description, in the link. And then just to wrap up, what do you think the world needs less of at the moment?
Less media.
That's a good start.
Less media and more, witnessing what's going on around in your own environment. Probably would help some of the trauma aspect of it anyway. Yeah, that's a big one to unpack, that one, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big question, I guess.
It's a big one to unpack, but yeah, given, I think that you could equate just this journey that we're on and we're all experiencing and we're all living is it's never going to be perfect, and I think it's naturally not meant to be perfect, but if you can set your coordinates to being creative and being in integrity and living by some deep moral compass on all levels, and being, you know, as we say, a good person, and you know, I think that's probably what the world needs. And I think there's a majority of people that already do that, which is great. I think what I see when you plug into it, which is disturbing, and it can be kind of off-putting, is just the ongoing, you know, trauma that seems to be just so apparent in many different areas. And there's it's so interwoven, and there's so much that you could unpack there. But it's almost, you know, it's not for me to tell people what to do at all, but I guess all I can do is just, you know, and what I do try and do is stay as positive as I can, a creative sense, and keep, you know, creating things that are kind of positive and make me feel good, and obviously, you know, give my life and my family life worth living, keeping things alive and active in that regard. Yeah, it's pretty full on with what's going on in so many respects, especially given this time. But throughout history, it's always had turbulence. You know, you look back, it's you know, to have what we have in so many respects, it's and where we are now, it's quite peaceful compared to probably what it might have been. You know, and as long as we've got like a rule of law there that is a foundational, you know, aspect to keeping things in a relatively peaceful and balanced way, I think we'll be okay. But it's an interesting time, yeah, definitely. But it's always going to be an interesting time, you know.
Yeah,
always going to be an interesting time. But
yeah, I sense some real tension coming through, like just even globally. You know, seeing what we see in the States, and you know, the unrest that might be coming about from what's happening at the moment. But you're right. There's always some sort of turbulence, isn't there?
Well, there always is, and there always will be. And you know, I think it's, you know, people they can't even get on in their own homes with their own families and their own, you know, bands, you know, let alone thinking the whole world has to get along. You know, I think that's a nice notion, and we need to, you know, be respectful and you know, of each other, but we're all different, and we've all got, you know, and that's what's great about us in many respects, you know, and we're not always going to agree on everything. So I think there's a little bit of that kind of like, it's trying to find that balance is is important, and there's always going to be conflict, I think, you know, in one respect or the other. And you know, if you can contribute obviously to society in a positive way, well then it should help balance it out and work itself out in a way where you know, there's less trauma and turbulence, you know, as long as you respect the other person's position and sovereignty of how they want to live their life and how they feel that they need to live their life, and as long as they're not doing any harm or causing any injury, you know, everything should work out. I mean, it's pretty profound that we in the rule of law, and we get, you know, it's come from, you know, when we look at that, and it's a big part of what I studied for a long period of time to get a bit of an understanding of how the world works. And I found it fascinating that without understanding where your rights come from and the rule of law and how that's all set up and galvanizes things together to create some balance, there can be a lot of, you know, confusion, you know. And I think, you know, we like to say, well, just be a good person, just be respectful. And these are all definitely good attributes, obviously. But, you know, there's 10 commandments, you know, and they're pretty logical and they're pretty simple. And if we kind of stick to those, I think we'll be okay. And I think it's pretty profound that those have been, you know, put in place as a compass, if you will, a moral compass to help guide us in a way where we can have some balance and have some relative peace, you know, in many aspects of our lives. And as long as that's there, I think we'll be okay. If we go back to, you know, the do what you want, do what thou wilt kind of, law of the jungle, complete, natural law in every aspect. I mean, it'll just be a bloodbath, an absolute bloodbath,
Yep.
And that's what we don't want. And I think, it's gotten to a point in history where we have been able to have some, things in place that can help balance things out. Hopefully, they'll stay there, and it's just unfortunate that if it gets corrupted or it gets hijacked, that's a whole other conversation. There's and a lot of that, in COG's music, we've tried to unpack in many different ways, and we've gone down different rabbit holes, and we've really tried to look at, are there solutions? Can there be solutions? What's the solution? Who's telling fibs? Who's lying? Who's not? Who's, how's society set up? Why? Where's it going? Who's directing it? All these bigger questions have definitely, played into COG's music anyway, and just a lot of the other bands I've played in as well. We've all, wondered about, well, what does the world need less of or more of, or just those typical questions that have probably been plaguing us for a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that if we can, it's a very tricky one, isn't it? Because and it's, you can't tell other people what to do, in some respects, but I think you've got to be very respectful of what other people think and feel as well. If we're all concerned about having less violence, we'll just be less violent. Try not to be that. As much as possible, and then that should create some element of balance. If we can get there with that. But it's pretty nuts right now. And what I'm saying is pretty crazy. There's a lot of things that aren't helping situations. That's for sure.
Much agreed. Much agreed.
But what do you do? I mean, you can only try, and if you can work on yourself, and you can get yourself in a position where you can do the best you can do, and with your family and all the rest of it. Hopefully that'll be a good path to walk down.
Yep. It's been a truly captivating conversation with you, Lucius Borich. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thanks, Simon. Cheers, mate.
Cheers. I hope you got something out of it like I did. Now, if you have any questions, feedback, or want to jump on the podcast, feel free to email me at thefeelgoodblueprint@gmail.com. I'm also all over socials at thefeelgoodblueprint. Thanks so much.